Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, Catcher in the Rye meets Friday the 13th. It's my review of I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones. So let me start by saying I think Stephen Graham Jones is a fantastic horror writer and a really interesting one as well. I absolutely loved his book, The Only Good Indians. I read it a few years ago for a book club, and that was a book club mostly of non-horror fans, but everybody enjoyed it. Everybody took something different from it. It's a really interesting and quite challenging book. I also really like My Heart is a Chainsaw. I need to read the rest of that trilogy, but I thought that opening book was absolutely fantastic. I'm going to be honest though, I didn't love I Was a Teenage Slasher, and I'll talk a bit in this video about the reasons I think why that is. I've had trouble kind of pinning it down in my mind a bit. I thought it was good, but I definitely didn't think it was as good as his other books. But I'm really looking forward to his next book. He's got a book coming out next year called Buffalo Hunter Hunter, which is a kind of Old West vampire tale, which looks absolutely fantastic. So very much looking forward to reading that soon. Anyway, let me get back to I Was a Teenage Slasher. So the book is set in Texas in the 80s, and I really liked that setting. That was, I think, probably the part of the book I enjoyed the most, was that sense of time and place. It really does feel like the 80s. I didn't live in Texas in the 80s, clearly, but I did live in the 80s, and I was a similar-ish age to the central character in the book in the 80s, and there were definitely things that were very familiar to me. And it has got a wonderful sense of place. It does, you do feel like you are in a kind of small town, a small town in Texas during that period. I thought that side of it was done really, really well. So the central character and the story is told from his perspective is this teenage boy, a high schooler, who becomes a slasher villain. And it's an interesting concept, and it's interestingly done. You don't, typically slasher movies and books and things like that, the slasher is a mysterious character. You don't see into their mind at all. They are just, in the shape, in the case of Michael Myers, literally the shape. They are this mysterious shape that just appears and slaughters people. So to see the inner workings of the slasher's mind is a really interesting concept. And this central character feels terrible about what he's done. The book is kind of his confessions. So you see the gradual build up through the story to the crimes that he ends up committing. And it is interesting, but I just felt like, for some reason for me, it didn't quite hang together as a story. I wasn't quite convinced by it. There are definitely some interesting ideas here, but I just didn't always find myself convinced by the plot. That said, the central character is a really sympathetic one and an interesting one, and Stephen Graham Jones always has interesting stuff to say about the horror genre. I think, though, for me, one of the problems with I Was a Teenage Slasher is that he said a lot of that stuff already with My Heart is a Chainsaw, and I felt that book did it better. I wonder if he'd left it a few years before publishing I Was a Teenage Slasher, it would have worked better, because it wouldn't have come hard on the heels of My Heart is a Chainsaw and its sequels. So that's one thing that I think maybe is a slight problem with the book. It's just that timing thing. It just feels too similar in some ways to to My Heart is a Chainsaw, albeit it does come at the slasher genre from the opposite angle, if you like. The other thing that I found slightly weird about this book when I was reading it was it reminded me a lot of Richard Laymon, who is an author who I have mixed feelings about, and is definitely an author who didn't have anywhere near the talent that Stephen Graham Jones has got. The reason for that similarity, I think, is that a lot of Laymon's books are about teenage guys who end up doing weird and horrible things. That's basically the plot of pretty much every Richard Laymon book. And that is essentially the plot of I Was a Teenage Slasher as well. You've got this teenage guy who's a bit uncomfortable with himself, who doesn't really know what he's doing, and he ends up becoming a slasher. And that felt so familiar to me from reading lots of Richard Laymon books when I was younger. Now, Stephen Graham Jones definitely does it better and does it in a more interesting way. But it was a sense that I couldn't shake as I was reading the book, that I was reading a bit like reading a better Richard Laymon book. But what's good about the book is that sense of place. It is that central character who is interesting. And there is a fantastic kind of rising tension throughout the book as it builds up to the kind of slashings, if you like. So it's definitely worth reading. It's definitely interesting, but I just don't think it lived up to the promise of Stephen Graham Jones's other books. So let me know in the comments if you've read I Was a Teenage Slasher and what you thought of it. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.